So you are a regular user that is considering switching from Windows to Linux, and I am here to tell you exactly what it entails for somebody who has only ever used Terminal to copy-paste commands from Google. When I was switching myself, all I could find were guides from experienced Linux users that were too far ahead to consider everyday struggles of regular people that want to just use their computer, not tinker with it. Now, I've been using Linux for half a year now, and I absolutely love it. I love it for all the usual reasons you will find online: responsiveness, performance, small size, less bloat, somewhat understandable and fixable errors, lack of spyware embedded into your system, etc. However, there are also many frustrating things that many times leave me baffled. I am not saying similar problems don't exist in Windows, but people that work in Windows solve them one at a time. In case of switching to Linux, all of them will have to be fixed in bulk, and it can be overwhelming. And I'm here to simply warn you about them, so you can decide if you can live with these issues and whether you should try and make the switch. Number 1, apps. So, first of all, I recommend that you make a list of programs that you use on Windows. For example, if you're a photographer and you use Lightroom and are not ready to downgrade to a less functional software, then forget about ditching Windows anytime soon. Adobe apps are simply not available, and there is no way to make them work on a Linux machine, no matter what YouTube videos will tell you. Same with Microsoft Office apps. If you're using Office apps for more than light work, for example, if you use complex VBA macros, you are unlikely to be able to migrate fully. You might feel like I'm speaking too much in absolutes and that there are ways like virtual machines and alternative apps, but in my experience, none of this makes sense, and nothing compares to being able to boot into Windows and just use the app without the constant fear of something breaking. There are features that you just won't get in alternative apps like OnlyOffice or LibreOffice that you might need for work, and there are multiple ways these apps can be incompatible, especially if you have to make sure your documents are consistent with Microsoft Office. In general, they might work fine, but I do not trust them in cases when my documents have to be opened by other people on Windows machines. I've found that there are things that are done differently there that can absolutely ruin it. Also, make sure that other apps that you use are available. For example, let's say you rely on Synology Drive application in Windows to back up your files. Then go to their website and see if they make releases for Linux. And if they do, check for which distributions, because that might impact which Linux distribution you land on. Sure, there might be unofficial flatpaks and whatnot, but that is simply too inconsistent and likely to result in errors that you cannot troubleshoot. Some applications have alternatives. For example, if you use Riva Tuner to show stats while gaming, there is Mango HUD that can do the exact same thing, but some apps like the aforementioned Synology Drive or Adobe Lightroom are irreplaceable. Factor that into your decision of whether you can switch to Linux completely or whether you'll have to dual boot with both Linux and Windows. It's important that you decide before you go ahead and install Linux. Number 2, gaming. Gaming on Linux is great when it works. I love how much smoother everything is when you are on Linux. I haven't tested this, but my CPU might be boosting to higher frequencies when I'm playing on Linux, as there isn't a bunch of background processes eating up all the resources. Just check out the stats on the screen and notice how on Windows my CPU is sitting at 100% all the time, while Linux is much more manageable. Both are at the same ultra settings, by the way. You're also watching me play Deadlock, which I launched from Steam with no messing around. Both Steam and Legendary Launcher for GOG and Epic are hassle-free solutions for running games and work a lot better than you would think they do. That said, if you play a lot of games, you will not be able to fully migrate to Linux. And here's my list of reasons why. Number 1, the drivers in your distro might be outdated. Unfortunately, new drivers don't reach end users as quickly as on Windows, especially with stable releases such as Debian. And that's only half the issue. It might even be so that your graphics card is not supported at all, so you cannot even boot. Case in point, a few weeks ago, I purchased AMD 7800 XT that was released a year ago. When I installed it into my PC, I was not able to boot into Debian because the latest build was released a few months before 7800 XT even hit the shelves. I tried everything and had at least 20 different people try to help me online. A week later, I was able to fix it by updating from the stable Debian release to the testing branch, which is its own can of worms. In contrast, both Windows and Fedora, another Linux distro that keeps up with the times, worked fine from the very start. So that's another reason to have dual boot or triple boot in my case. Installing Fedora was a necessity because I chose Debian for the abundance of packages that are made available by developers before I chose a bleeding edge graphics card. Number 2, gaming peripherals are unlikely to work. If you play racing games, for example, with a wheel, you might not be able to get it to work on Linux. There's simply not big enough demand. On the other hand, some peripherals might actually run better. For example, in order to use PS4 controller on Windows, you need to install DS4 Windows, and on Linux and KDE, it is recognized automatically. So it's a mixed bag. Number 3, some games just won't run no matter what you do. For example, I wanted to play Don't Starve, a fairly old game that was released on Linux at the same time as Windows and has native Linux support. Surely it would be able to run just fine, right? Well, I tried to run it on Fedora, and I was getting weird glitches that I couldn't fix. I spent 3 hours trying to figure it out, and in the end I gave up and went back to Windows to play the game, with no issues. But that said, it's the same problem on Windows. Some games just refuse to work properly on Windows, but they work well on Linux. For example, I was trying to play Stray, and I was getting this error all the time a few minutes into the game. I then tried the same game on Linux and it worked fine. Switching, updating, cleaning, rolling back my GPU drivers did not work, and maybe a clean install of Windows would fix it. But who has the time for that? For me, I have found that it's best to have both Linux and Windows and try both before spending any time troubleshooting the game. It's just not worth my time. Number 4, you will not have access to GPU features such as radio and chill, fluid motion frames, and so on. And VRR, as in G-Sync or FreeSync, might not work for you at all. And even if the feature does exist, you will have to first know about its existence and then also remember how to set the launch option to enable it. Number 5. If you play multiplayer games, chances are they use some anti-cheat software. While some games might not run at all, others will ban you for simply running Linux, even if the game itself runs fine. And for all these reasons, I keep Windows just in case. Going back to the things that will frustrate you in Linux, it's number 3, downloading apps is a complete mess. First of all, not every app will have a neat website where you can check what builds are available. And even if it does exist, and you do download from it, be prepared to become the enemy number 1 of every Linux community. Most often, your app will either exist on GitHub and will have installation instructions, or it will be available through official repositories, but it will not always be the latest version there. You may be able to find it in any of the following ways, as well as through FlatHub. Take note that the screens on the right side are Debian specific, and if you have another distribution, it will be slightly different. If you don't find your app anywhere except for FlatHub or Snap Store, ask yourself if you're okay with it potentially not having access to your system or your other apps. For example, I installed MangoHut as a regular install and Steam as a Flatpak, and so I was not able to launch MangoHut from Steam. Some apps don't need to communicate with other apps, and it's in general advised to isolate them for security reasons, but Flatpaks are not even considered secure containers. Speaking of security, how do you feel that the Flatpak you are downloading was made by John Doe and not the developer themselves, and so might contain God knows what? There have been reports of malware in Flatpaks, so I stay away from them whenever I can. Also, your choice will determine if you will be able to update it along with all your other apps or not. Number 4, tinkering. For you to be able to use your Linux, it's likely you'll have to do some tinkering. There's a high chance something is not going to work or will not work the way you want it. But this tinkering is worth it because if you are already at this step, then it means that none of my previous points dissuaded you from trying out Linux. And if you're already here, you should definitely power through, because after you are done setting everything up, it should run fine and shouldn't need too much of your input. But don't forget to back up with Timeshift or BTRFS Assistant or whatever other system backup utility you have before you start doing anything. Back up your clean installation. Right after you have installed your Linux, back it up. You'll thank yourself for it. Now, there will be 1,000 little cuts that will make you bang your head on the wall, thinking, why does it have to be so complicated? It will make you want to give up because it will feel like an endless stream of problems that each takes half a day to fix. Here are some of the little cuts that I experienced. Number 1, drives. They don't mount automatically, at least not in all distros. You'll have to set up mounting yourself through Disks utility, or through editing appstab file. Otherwise, every time you restart your computer, you'll have to enter your password to access your other partitions. Also, you will have to contend with the fact that there is no My Computer to access your drives. The best you can get is the panel on the side of your Explorer. Oh, and by the way, if you have to mount a network drive, be prepared for suffering. Number 2, fonts. Linux uses a different font for the system because fonts in Windows belong to Microsoft. You might not notice this, but for some it really sticks out. I personally had headache looking at Debian screen for longer times because of this, and had to try many different display settings as well as install Microsoft fonts manually to make it better. Also, for example, Ubuntu is better than Debian with this, so you might not have to do this if you choose Ubuntu. Number 3. In line with the previous point, your Linux installation will not come with any non-open source stuff like codecs, fonts, drivers, etc. In some distros like Ubuntu, installing them can be easy. In others like Tumbleweed, it can be a major pain point, so be aware. Number 4. In the same way, your hardware might not work and you will have to spend countless hours researching why. In my case, I had a Bluetooth dongle in my USB port for my headphones. I could not figure out why it was not working. I installed firmware for my obscure dongle from some random GitHub repository. I reinstalled many different distros many times, and every time in every distro, it seemed that Bluetooth worked for a while and then it just stopped and I could not revive it. It turned out that when Linux goes to hibernate, it disconnects my Bluetooth dongle in such a way that it will never ever work again unless I replug it. So it had nothing to do with drivers or anything, but with how hibernation was broken for me for some reason. So I had to turn it off completely. Number 5. Little things in your desktop environment. Unlike Windows, in Linux you have more customization options. You can choose GNOME, which looks like Windows 11, KDE or Cinnamon, which look like earlier versions of Windows, and XFCE if you like Windows 98 or something. There's a bunch of others, but there will be a lot of stuff you will want to change that will not be as obvious as flipping a switch in settings. For example, in Cinnamon, to have finer control over icon sizes on taskbar, I had to edit theme CSS files. And in KDE, in order to summon Task Manager on Ctrl-Alt-Delete, I not only had to create a keyboard shortcut for it myself, but also go to keyboard settings in advanced, find the key to choose the third level setting, and check Right Alt never chooses third level, so that Ctrl-Alt-Delete shortcut actually works. This is fixed in newer versions of KDE, but if you install the latest stable Debian, it'll come with this old version that has this issue. Number 6. Support. Now, this is not a beef against Linux community, but it's just something that I've noticed and something that you as a new user that requires a ton of support will have to work with. People online, especially Reddit users, forget the for different folks different strokes adage and expect you to know what they know, use what they use, and do what they do. Additionally, if they're regulars on that subreddit or forum, then they might be explaining the same things over and over and over again, and they may go on a tangent about things that you don't care about instead of replying to your simple question. Or they could expect you to read 300-page doc to find an answer without considering the fact that you likely don't even understand how to read that doc since you're not familiar with the jargon and so on. So don't expect to get an answer right away and don't get into arguments with those people. It will take some time before you learn how to ask for help, so just be patient. Oh, and that's another reason to have dual boot, because if your Linux system breaks, you can return to Windows and use that while you wait for replies regarding your Linux problem. What I recommend is that instead of limiting yourself to Reddit, you go to your distributions forum, or in case of Linux Mint, their Discord server. I have found these to be more helpful than Reddit, even if it's much slower to get replies than on Reddit. Also, if you have some basic questions, drop them below in the comment section, but don't expect me to know. I'm just a noob that's still learning that wanted to share his experience. I might also make another useful video about Linux for noobs like me, so stay tuned.